And this is the second installment of What Does the Research Say? So it kind of as an introduction, this one has a little bit of a story. So I'll begin by saying that recently, well, it's been about a month now, I was at South by Southwest EDU, and one of the sessions that I attended was assessment through gaming. And they the panelists were basically from a company that was a spinoff from the University of Texas, and it was a neat, innovative model where they used student programmers as the actual programmers, and the proceeds and funds from the game sales went into further development. So it was a self-sustaining little work, and they concentrated on academic education games. They have 3 main products out right now, and they bring faculty members in as content experts. And they showed us an art history game, a calculus game, and there was one other, but they didn't touch on that one that much. So let me just show you really quickly.
But the point of these games was to not just have students playing games, but to
that was all it was about, was just playing games.
To assess them in some way.
Yeah.
Which is the title of this
well, the title
session.
of this thing is Stealth Assessment.
Right.
And so I'm not quite there yet from the conference, but it was mentioned in the conference that the leaders in gaming assessment are all from Florida State University.
Right.
So that was my only, well, it wasn't my only takeaway, but that was kind of I stuffed that in my backpack, and that's how I led me to read our current reading list. But let me show you one of the games. It's from their trailer, but it's a few seconds of gameplay from their game called Variant, and it teaches certain bits of calculus. And this is a still screen right now, but you're the character in the middle, and let me just play it.
Educational experiences for calculus students. Variant Limits brings calculus to life by
So that's the calculus student
into creative and visually engaging challenges. As an
So they have to
explorer,
actually apply calculus equations to succeed in the game.
Right. They have to understand all the theorems and all the stuff that we studied in school, except they're challenged to like, for instance, the character has to get through this gate. They have to solve a calculus puzzle by applying the right theorems and so forth. A gate opens and they can proceed to the next task.
And that is technically a kind of assessment.
Well, it's a de facto assessment that can you get past the gate or not. That's one measurement.
But as a student, you don't see it that way because it's a fun game.
Well, supposedly it's a fun game. I haven't played this particular one. We heard from some of the students, and they said that some of them went in with the idea that they would be spending less time. If this would be easy, we'll just play a game. And of course, they were tricked into playing a lot.
Right.
And of course, they learned the material. But so anyway, after seeing this one and another game on art history and Renaissance history and Renaissance politics, I said, well, I'm going to find out what these folks at Florida State are doing. And if you do a search for Florida State University and gaming assessment, you're gonna run across Valerie Shute.
If you do a search for just stealth assessment anywhere, you're going to run across Dr. Shute.
Yeah, and she is, as far as I can tell from my brief reading, she kind of came up with the idea of stealth assessment. And let's go to one of her papers and see what she has to say. She calls stealth assessment is intended to support learning and maintain flow. So those are the main goals of it. Is you don't interrupt the person's immersive experience in whatever game they're playing.
Right.
And let's just extend that, hopefully, to like a greater education system. If a person is doing a task, if the student's engaged in something, you don't say, "Oh, hold on, could you fill out this survey with some Likert scale?"
Right. So in a traditional framework, you'd have, even if you had a game that focused on some outcomes, the assessment's always after that, right? Okay, the game's done, kids. Now you have to take this test. Everyone knows it's a test, right? And you mentioned flow. That's an actual theory. I can't pronounce the guy's name, but the idea that when you're engaged in something, you're not really aware of the passing of time. You're incredibly invested in that experience for the sake of that experience.
Yeah, time goes out the window, and focus gets narrowed to the task at hand.
Right, and I don't know about you, but I've never felt like that taking the SATs. Flow theory really doesn't. You don't have flow when you're taking a standardized test. So I guess the idea of stealth assessment is to maintain flow if a student can achieve it while still gathering data about their achievement and their progress.
Well, where are some of the places you've experienced flowing besides games?
Creative games are one application. Any kind of creative pursuit where you start from a blank slate and create something is a good example.
Building Legos as a kid,
yeah.
Surfing, flying an airplane. But most of my experiences, I think recently, flow comes into when you're playing a game. I mean, the time is like, really, 5 hours just passed? I didn't realize that.
Right.
So you don't want to interrupt that with some sort of external assessment. And so this diagram that I have up on the page, some of her early papers, they talked about some games like around 2000. We look back at them now and they look ugly to us and jarring, but you have to remember the advances in video cards and all that sort of thing. And she talked about two games in this paper. One was Taiga Park, where students had to go in and fight some natural resource.
Right.
There was like a developer, a tourist, and an ecologist, and they had to go around, gather information, and so forth. The other game that she looked at, and that's what this chart is about here.
Can you zoom in on that a little bit?
I'm going to try and do that. That was some pretty good mouse work there. So the key thing that she's trying to measure, the penultimate thing, is success in Oblivion. Oblivion is a kind of an adventure game. It's a one-player game, and you run around. And the interesting thing, and it's put out by Bethesda Games. You can get it on Steam and play it today. It's an open world. It's very large, and you can run around, and there's quest givers everywhere, and puzzles and things to fight. But you don't have to do them linearly. You can do them as you want. You can start in the north part of the map in the academy, or go wherever. And so to measure that, what is success in Oblivion? There is some sort of end quest that you have to do, but there's many tasks along the way, assessment.
And different types of success, and different people who play the game end up having different roles of their choice, right?
Right. You start with roles that of your own choosing. You can specialize in particular kinds of fighting. You can be the land's greatest armor maker if you want to.
So she has defined success some way through this competency model.
Right. And on the right-hand side, you see efficiency and novelty. And it's interesting to note, I wasn't able to pick up from the paper, but I'm just assuming that these are things that were observed by another person in the room just watching someone play the game. They didn't stop the player from playing, but they watched and they saw how particular people solve the problems.
So in this case, there were observations that were going into the stealth assessment.
Yes.
So
a human observer.
That's actually a good point to make, is that a lot of what is defined as stealth assessment is there's some kind of an algorithm or behind the scenes data gathering that students don't know about, that's looking at all their actions and sort of ranking them in a way, and that feeds into a network which gives a kind of a score determining success. But as we were discussing the other day, if you want to talk about what stealth assessment is, it could just be looking over the shoulder of a student and making a note of their progress or their actions in a face-to-face classroom, for example. So this is taking it to an extreme level of data management and
it's
finesse, right?
It is, and she mentions the problem of if you make a Bayesian net where on the right-hand side you have things that you can actually observe and are measurable, and they feed in according to the construction of the net things that aren't directly measurable.
But this is not a Bayesian network. Did you have that example?
No, it's not in this particular article.
Okay.
So she can measure the things on the right-hand side, which lead to conclusions based upon her model of the person's success. So the problem with this, and she didn't state it in this early article, though, was that that's not scalable. You can't sit behind every student and observe them, especially, you know, in distance programs. That's not going to work out.
And this is shoot what year? Which
this is 2011, writing about a game that took place in 2004.
And we should mention that all of the academic sources that we're discussing today are going to be available. There'll be a link at the bottom of the
we'll highlight
chat,
that.
and they're on a page for everyone to access.
No, we're testing people's memory out. They have to remember this stuff. So she let's look at the next article. Again, these are so then after she worked on games that were already existing, they didn't create, they went to games that they could create, and they built in a measurement system offhand. And I think I want to talk about Portal 2 and Lumosity for a second.
What is Portal 2?
Portal 2 is a game, and you have a portal gun, which isn't a weapon, but it shoots out a blue and a orange circle, and it allows you to warp space and travel between the portals and solve spatial puzzles. It has a storyline behind it, and it's extremely fun to play. To play the game typically from beginning to end is about 12 hours, and you work your way through puzzles and a story. Rather than describe it, how about I just show it?
So just to preface this is something that was made into a stealth assessment was attached to Portal 2 gameplay.
Right. They were trying to measure, the study was measuring the gains in spatial, actually, let's just look at what they were measuring. They were trying to find out skills developed in problem solving, spatial skills, and persistence. And they looked at students in a control group, students that played a game called Lumosity, which is a brain training game. You can download it. And
I'm sure people are familiar with that.
Sure. And then they looked at the same skills developed after people play 8 hours of Lumosity, 8 hours of Portal 2. And
so it's like a pre and post assessment kind of
a pre and post assessment. So they actually played these two different games, and then they put them into this thing called the VSNA, the Virtual Spatial Navigation Assessment, which is basically another little maze-like game where you run around and find different gems.
Okay.
So you're changing you're developing a mind map of the space you run through. So let me show you what Portal 2 is like. So here I am in Portal 2. You can spin around. This is the beginning of a chamber. And I'm going to run over here and jump down. So there's an angry turret over there. So that's one of my challenges. I can't get shot by this automated turret. And as I look around the room, the little exit thing over there, that's my goal. That's where every test chamber, and this is something that players learn, they have to get out of this room. So I can further look around and see different things in the room. And the portal mechanic, it might be faint on the screen, but you can see a blue and orange arc. So if you shoot on the ground, that's an orange portal. And I'm sorry, that was a blue portal. This is the orange portal. So if you enter the blue one, you come out of the orange one. And there's different things you can do. Everything in the game is almost manipulable in some sense.
Right.
So this little blue laser beam thing is actually, you can walk on it if it's horizontal. So I could shoot the blue thing there and notice that it came out of the orange portal.
Right.
So I can actually, I've already solved the problem of the angry turret because I can hide behind this beam now.
So move it as you need to.
Right. So now I've got my own personal shield, but I can also do things like, and I'll run over here. I can have the beam come out right there, and you can step on it, And I'm not going to go too much further in here, but
so in that study, what was being assessed in this gameplay?
Okay, so
They
indirectly, remember, they wanted
problem
solving, spatial. Let me turn the volume down on this thing. So problem solving, spatial skills, and persistence.
Okay, and this was one of the studies that was not, they were not successful in this stealth
They
assessment.
were partially. So they took the leap of removing the human observer, watching every student do this. You can't. I mean, think about trying to watch, 76 students in the study,
well,
8 hours of play each.
How would you operationalize any of those?
What they did is they realized that through the play of the game, and typically games will produce some sort of log, and we're kind of entering the world of big data now.
Yeah.
But every action in that game, the location of the player, the timing, the location where portals are shot, how many deaths are made,
how long it takes you to get from the beginning to end.
The solution time, all of that is put into a very large log file, which was just in the programmers of the game, you would use that for debugging. That's what it was there for.
Yeah.
And even though you can access it on all the test machines, they couldn't decode what everything meant.
Right.
And so they were able to pull out some of the items, like the length of time it took for the puzzles, but not all of every little bit of data.
All right.
They didn't have the full cooperation of the game developers.
So you could theoretically apply an assessment to a game using, as long as that game is producing some kind of a record or log file of actions, right?
Right. And going back to the Tritium games and the UT development, what they're doing is building assessment in right from the beginning.
That's University of Texas.
Yes, it's its own entity, but it's basically a little shell corporation for University of Texas. And if you do that from the beginning, then the assessment is built in, and then it's easy to create like a grade book of sorts of people's progress in the game. Like, well, these students are they're not understanding this particular calculus limit theorem, or they don't understand the purpose of this art piece, or the place of the Medici family. And so how do we get them more information? That's where the teacher can intervene. Yeah. But you can also do gross measurements later. So maybe it's time now to bring it back full circle. And and the URL here is pr.alaska.edu, and you can see the top post. I've curated the journal articles that we've talked about here today, but I wanted to jump over to like what is kind of some of my goals for this, and I wanted it to be research-based, effective, and something that you could directly put into an online class. So I'm going to give myself a sort of failing grade, maybe an incomplete, because let's think about it.
The point of this, and I, just to paraphrase you, since I know what your goals are here, is to look at the sort of breadth of research out there on educational research. Some of it not so good, or not so, or claiming to be conclusive, but really when you examine their sample size or their study methodology, maybe it's not so conclusive. That's what we're trying to look at here. But this is a pretty specific area of research, correct?
Well, it's definitely, it's a new area. I mean, you think about research in general, she started off in 2001, 2002, and now she's getting into games with this stealth assessment built into it. The problem is, and you mentioned, I think the technical term for a lot of educational research is wishy-washy. I mean, the results they don't lead toward best practices, which is what instructors want to know. Like, what should I do? What's the best way to accomplish this? So the failing part of this is that instructors, for the most part, don't have the resources to program their own game. Run and support, obviously.
This is a pretty high bar for if you have a really goal, if you have a subject area that is convenient or easily applicable to this kind of assessment, or you already know of a game that maybe you are already using a game in class, even a simple one. This could be something. So if you already probably have data from user, student play, you could then look at it from a starting point of stealth assessment. But the bar to entry, if you wanted to create a game and use that to assess things in your class, is pretty high. The University of Texas has they have a large budget and a lot of resources for that, but it's not
Well,
it's not out of reach.
Well, and that now to kind of extend it to what we normally do around here, it doesn't have to be a multi-million-dollar game investment company to produce a workable product.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the takeaway is it's sort of, well, Seinfeld and Louis C.K., they kind of, the comedians, they talk about what you never do as a comedian, or there's probably lots of things you never do as a comedian, but one of them is if the audience is enjoying the joke, if they're in the moment, don't take them out of that moment. If they're laughing at your joke, you did something right. So don't try and rush them along.
Right.
So if you're in the middle of a learning activity in your class, and the students are digging in, then like whatever you thought your agenda was going to be, it's got to go out the window, because I think they got to stay in that moment.
That's a really good point. That's an experience that I've had. In an online classroom, I suppose there's a different.
You have a lot more flexibility, because someone could be very well in the flow,
right?
And they'll spend all Sunday night doing that. That's great, and you're not gonna. Who's gonna interrupt them? And it's an asynchronous
How
class.
do you know what they're doing?
Well, you see the results again. You can't measure it at the time, but you see.
I get flexibility in if there are certain a weekly topic that garners a great deal of interest, you could extend that. And I've been in classes like that where things are extended or the syllabus changes as the course goes. Maybe not the syllabus itself, but areas are given different focus in the class. So even that, I guess our point is, you don't have to be programming games to be practicing what you could call stealth assessment.
And she also came up with ECD. I forgot what the E stands for. But she did come up with two best practices. One was, and it kind of reminds me of Quality Matters a bit. When you're creating the Bayesian net to like measure what is successful, what is competency, what is mastery, you want to choose the external measures, and those are like what you're measuring in the game, that align with the stealth assessment. And I've got to kind of criticize one of her measurements in when they did scrape some of the large amount of data from the log files in Portal. They used a metric to like a smaller number of Portal gunshots or realignments of the portals was better. And you saw me. I bet you would just be clicking all over the place because it's fun. Right?
Well, what's the downside? Right.
Well, what's the downside to that? So I'd have to criticize her a little bit on that one measurement. But time to solve a puzzle, that's a good measurement. That aligns with.
And I think that applies to any type of assessment, not just stealth assessment. Is what do you determine to be valuable measures? What do you want students to be achieving? If you really want them to play, if they're going for the Portal 2 speed record, I'm sure someone has one, then they probably want to minimize their Portal creation and run through the game as fast as they can. But if you're me, you might spend an hour and a half on a level that would take you 10 minutes because I like clicking on everything and looking at everything in the game. So that's a good point, Dan, and an important consideration.
Well, that's the long and short of it. We have any questions from folks, or?
Heidi asked for the URL, and I put that into the chat. We'll also add that after the fact to the YouTube description here, and this is being recorded, so anyone who came in late or wants to share this, it will be accessible at the same URL. Also, this is our first time broadcasting from our media studio. We haven't figured everything out yet, but I think you're able to hear us and see. You got to see Dan play Portal. That's that's a bonus.
Sorry about that, folks.
But we're also looking into. We want to spend our time analyzing a research that would be applicable to an online classroom. So if there are certain subject areas that there's an interest in on campus, please let us know, and Dan will do all the reading.
I'll do most of it. Next, I wonder if we could find the next date for our next what the research says. But we're going to look at video assessment and what the research says for best practices there. Maybe we'll just give a moment to see if any questions come in, but we won't stretch it too far.
I can. Is that a virtual session, Dan?
Yes, it's in the workshop planning.
I can find it.
Yeah, we're going to test out Sean's Google Drive skills here. We'll have a little competition.
There's one on May 3rd.
May 3rd.
At noon.
That's right.
So in a couple weeks, next month, we'll talk about something new. Video assessment, I believe.
Video assessment.
Yeah. Another assessment-based thing. And that should actually be, there should be a lot more there because video has a longer history of being used in education than video games, at least broadly. So, all right.
Thanks.
Thank you.